Hello, welcome back to Mountain Gym Card Collectibles. I hope you're having a great week so far. So, today I am going over some data points from GemRate and how far people have decided to kind of back off grading their sports cards, and how TCG grading is booming, and why I believe there's a lot of factors that are driving this change. The first factor that comes to mind, that you can't deny, would be our current economy. I mean, you need like crystal balls on steroids to try and figure out what's going on with our economy day in and day out, with all the constant changes, the tariff war, the trade war. So I believe that is pushing sports card grading down. And it's the spring, but you have to ask yourself, but why is TCG grading so much? Why is that going up so much and sports card grading is going down? And that, my economy argument starts to break down. Because if people are spending lots of money grading their TCG, Pokemon, whatever, over their sports cards, why is that? Now, if you've been watching baseball this season, I've noticed something with the games. And I see a lot of baseball games with, somewhat empty stadiums. Why is that? Is it just getting too expensive to partake in the world of sports, going to baseball games, whatever? And is it the fact that if you want to get involved in sports cards, it's really a hobby that tends to bend the knee to the wealthiest individuals who are involved? And when it comes to TCG, it doesn't work that way. You don't need to have a ton of money to run into awesome TCG cards and get them graded. So why? Why now? Why are people turning away from sports cards? And I think it has a lot to do with the pandemic. We had a sports card boom. And I think that the sports card companies were given a great opportunity at that point in time to show that they cared about the consumers. But overall, let's face it, sports card companies typically don't care about consumers. And I know that. And that's why it always made sense that if you want to get into sports cards, they shouldn't be charging a lot of money for them. Anyway, so, I do follow GemRate on Twitter, but I haven't really been keeping up with them as much as I should have been. And then I watched Neo's video yesterday about these GemRates, and he was, trying to figure out, his theories on why this is changing. There aren't many specials at PSA, which, that adds to why people pull back on grading. But then again, to see the numbers booming up in the TCG, it just doesn't make sense. Yeah, here's the April 25 grading recap. So let's take a look at this. All right, so this is sports cards and miscellaneous graded last month. And PSA graded 570,000 sports cards. SGC was 158,000. CGC is 30,000. Beckett's 19,000. I wish that they would add all of these numbers up down here so you don't have to do it in your mind. So, but anyway, when I look at this, we're at about 750,000 cards total with all of this. That's just rounding it out. You know, and then the month over month, like say at PSA is down 17%, whereas the year over year. Now this is the alarming numbers here. Down 23%. That's a big hit. I can't say it's not. Now SGC, they're kind of loving SGC a little bit, but not with the numbers. But overall, month over month is down 5%, but year over year is up 15%. CGC and Beckett. CGC is up 43% month over month, 63% year over year. So people are starting to kind of, grade more over there for one reason or another. And then Beckett is down 32% month over month and down 41% year over year. I'm not too surprised with BGS. But then we come to TCG. And the numbers are just exploding. I mean, I can't say that this is like an atomic blast here, but they are to an extent. 989,000 TCG in non-sport grade, up 25% month over month, up 111%. So you can't just sit there and say it's the economy with sports cards. CGC, 311,000, up 37%, up 92% year over year. I mean, it's always going up. Even Beckett is doing good with TCG, which is crazy. Beckett, 38,000, down 5% month over month, up 24% year over year. SGC, 8,000, up 14% month over month, down 65%. So people have decided to kind of turn up their nose to SGC on their TCG grading and non-sport. And these are just some more, data point numbers. TCG cards grade at PSA by month. If we look at, the pandemic, close to 213 January 22nd, up to 951, and these are in hundreds of thousands. So that is a big, steep climb. And really the steepest, jump would be from September 24 to where we're at now of March 25. So really, I mean, this has been booming. I mean, there's been, you can see these bumps and it went down, but then this last boom is just really just out of control. Now, I'm not sure if what's happening is the change and people going, I've decided to go more into TCG and grade more TCG over sports cards because it seems to pay back more. That's just it. And so they're turning their back on sports cards for a lot of reasons. But the numbers, are really booming for TCG. And, the thing about Pokemon is it's typically more organic than, say, sports cards, to where sports cards you have to have a lot of money to get into the best products, right out the gate. So, that's the April recap. But, you saw the year over year, the month over month. There's a lot of not good things going on there for sports cards. All right, so now I'm at gem rate. And I just wanted to dig into some of the cards that people were currently grading at gem rate to see, who the superstars are for cards. So I'm just going down here. This is just like yesterday's, last 7 days, whatever, for TCG, football, all these other types of grading. Let's see. And then we get to see some numbers here. So, graded last week, graded the prior week. Pikachu. Everyone is grading their Pikachus right now. Why? I don't know. All time, there's 1,432,689. But, last week, 13,563 Pikachus were graded. Prior week, 16,078. Weekly change down 16%. Charizard. Well, grade all time 1,815,483. Last week they graded 13,401. The prior week was 14,441, down 7%. Eevee, another big Pokemon, grade all time 254,946. That's quite a few. Grade last week 7,632. Grade the prior week 8,517, down 10%. And then we come to the big sports star for grading at this point. Jane Daniels. Grade all time, 86,567. So that's quite a few. Last week, 7,336. The prior week, 6,840. Then we come to more Pikachus. We have Mew, Umbreon, Mewtwo. But then we hit the next big sports star, Michael Jordan, followed by Shohei Ohtani. Michael Jordan last week, 3,566. Grade prior week, 4,076, down 13%. Shohei Ohtani, last week, 3,089. Prior week was 3,276, down 6%. And then Bo Nix, for one reason, is up there, followed by, another Pokemon Sylveon. And then we have Caitlin Clark. Last week they graded 2,806. The week before that was 2,845, down 1%. Grade all time 136,653. Then we got the Blastoise Pokemon, followed by Wemby, Victor Wembanyama, Caleb Williams. But what gets me about the grading is baseball. We see the big sports stars, Jane Daniels, football, Michael Jordan, basketball, Shohei Ohtani, baseball. So really he, as far as grading goes, he's the biggest one to grade. But, I was curious, well, how about for rookie baseball players? Well, for last year, Paul Skeens, people are still grading quite a bit as Paul Skeens, down 1%, for the week. There's some more football players, popping up here. Then we hit Ken Griffey Jr., he's a big name. We keep going down here, I'm not seeing any, big baseball players, which is surprising. Keep going down. More Pokemon. Right here, Roki Sasaki. At this point, Roki Sasaki tends to be the most graded rookie card for the 2025 MLB season. He's had a total of 21,485 graded, 904 graded last week. Prior week was 722, and that's a 25% weekly change. Roki Sasaki, we have to give him credit, but let's be honest here. Baseball is getting beat up by TCG, and baseball's really taken a hit to where, pretty much you have to be a super big name, to get your stuff graded. And there isn't a lot of excitement, obviously, for the rookie class because at this point, Roki Sasaki is the biggest 2025 rookie, to be graded for the year. Which is surprising. And there's some other big names from, the last few years, rookies coming out, but that's something to consider if you're chasing down 2025 rookies. Now, for one reason, Roki Sasaki is the biggest one at this point. So, what does this mean? Well, it means that interest is waning in baseball cards for one reason or another. Yeah, there's a lot of baseball card channels on YouTube pushing it, which is great. I like baseball cards. But let's face it, a lot of, your fan base is moving away from baseball cards for one reason or another. Probably because of all the gamesmanship going on with the monopolies, like Topps Fanatics, Panini, And, it's when you get into sports, you have to have a big budget. You really do. And it's just such a shame because really, if sports wants to start competing with the consumer market, they have to lower their prices and get them closer to Pokemon prices. And I know they don't want to do it. And the reality is you would likely need different corporations involved to do that. You see, because Topps Fanatics, they want to become like a $1 billion corporation, $1 trillion corporation off the backs of sports card investors, collectors, this and that. And they really just work it. I've noticed, watching some breaking channels, they're not getting as many views as they used to, especially for sports cards. Whereas it seems like I've noticed if my Pokemon breaking channels that I watch, some of them aren't doing good either, but some of them are starting to blow up more, and I can understand why. It's a more affordable hobby, and affordability is very important when you're collecting sports cards. And there's a lot of issues with sports cards, with autos, with a lot of the oversigning of autographed cards, which is really the high point of sports cards. And if you're constantly, having athletes signing week in and week out, whatever, for each and every set that's, being spit out by Topps on a weekly basis, it turns off your card collectors, because that's an issue with autographs where you do want scarcity and rarity. And the way they're being pumped out is you're not really seeing that, The constant one-of-one gamesmanship with sports cards, with the manufactured scarcity, it leaves a lot of sports card investors, collectors, not feeling very happy because they're trying to make something that really isn't. That's what the sports card companies are doing. When it comes to Pokemon, yeah, we know how much, the Pokemon fans dislike scalpers and this and that. And they've really, worked at keeping the prices down. I just wish that the sports card market would react the same. Because the sports card market just seems to be this place that just welcomes scalpers, hey, come on in, I wish it wasn't like that. As far as, bringing modern changes to the sports card hobby, I know Topps Fanatics has really tried to, do some different things, but I just think it's hitting a flat note for one reason or another because of, the way that they do things. And you have to ask yourself, is Topps Fanatics helping or hurting the hobby? And I think that when they got into this, during the pandemic, they believed that things were just going to keep churning away. People wouldn't think. They just keep, blindly purchasing Topps products, But the issue with sports cards is you're always up against, rookie classes. You're always dealing with that. So there are so many reasons to turn away from sports cards, It's an expensive hobby, sports cards are. I would say it's a more expensive hobby than, say, if you're into Yu-Gi-Oh! Or, say, Pokemon. Or any of these other TCGs, to be honest. Yeah, we know that some people really, really sink in TCG, with the addiction. Same with sports cards. But the thing about, the Pokemon realm is what I've noticed, going to like my most recent sports card show, was when you go to a lot of sports card tables at a sports card show, you're dealing with like different types of people than you are at a Pokemon table. Typically a Pokemon table, it's much more welcoming for the fact that it's much more affordable. All right. And when you step up to a sports card table and you're looking at $300, $400, $500, $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 cards, well, I noticed it at the last sports card show I went to. A lot of those tables were just like sitting empty. Nobody was even looking at the cards. And then when you go there, a lot of times, I don't know what it is about sports card dealers at these shows, but a lot of them are really rude and they're not very nice. Whereas I don't know what it is about the Pokemon tables. You know, a lot of times I go to a Pokemon table, I'm dealing with, a woman over a man, and hey, that's great. To be quite honest, they're a lot more nice to me. The customer service is there. Whereas for one reason, you go to these sports card tables, and I don't know what it is, but the rudest people tend to have sports card tables. And so that doesn't help out, the sports card hobby as well. So we kind of need to bring in some different sort of people for sports cards. But what I see, from grading overall with these grading numbers, when you start to dig into what is being graded, it's just a ton of TCG, and every now and then you run across, a sports star here and there. That is a lot of red flags for sports cards. I'll say it again. I just wish that Topps and Fanatics would leave the hobby and go back to doing what they did best. Clothing. I mean, they're awesome at it. Leave the sports cards to the small companies who like to sell the stuff at lower prices. If you want to bring the hobby back, you got to lower the prices at the baseball stadiums. You got to make it to where people can start watching baseball games more easily over television, maybe put more over-the-air baseball games on. I don't know. I've pulled my hair out trying to figure that out. You'd have to make baseball more like it was in the 80s, to where the public has an easier way of digesting baseball games than having to pay, all this money for, like the stream ESPN or whatever, that would help. And then, the issue with sports cards is, it's always been an issue, is you get the sports card, you slab it up, it sits in your drawer or wherever, a box with your collection. Whereas with TCG, you always have the option of using it to play in a tournament, a game. Yeah, I can't imagine using a PSA slab in a tournament, But what I'm saying is TCG, there's just more you can do with the cards than, just put them up on a mantle and cross your fingers, and then you're always dealing with the sports card dealers and so much chicanery that goes with sports cards. Yeah, it's also there for Pokemon. But overall, it just seems like there's more chicanery with sports cards. I just think it's driven a lot of people out of the hobby. A lot of people came in during the pandemic. They got a taste of sports card people. And I think a lot of them went, you know what, I really like this hobby, but for one reason, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and TCG really seems to work more with my interests, with my budget, whatever. So, how do we change this? That's just it. How do you get more people interested in sports cards again? Well, that's just it, It has to change very drastically. It had its chance, and in my opinion, people came into the hobby, saw something that they thought that they could take part in and be involved in, and realized that they're only there to support breakers. If you want to, get into a new box, then you have to get tied in with a breaker, to get some new cards, because who can afford, like $2,000 boxes, $1,000 boxes, even $800 boxes? Who can really afford that, Breakers can. And so the problem with sports cards is it's like you have your sports cards fanatics. They come in. Well, a lot of them don't have a lot of money, and so they're laughed at. Maybe they bring their cards to a sports card show. Nobody buys them. Maybe they win on Whatnot. They tried selling their sports cards on Whatnot. Whatnot's laughing at them because they're not the highest graded sports cards that they're giving away. And I just feel like the sports card hobby is a country club. I know I've said it on this channel before. It to an extent really is. It only awards certain types of people, typically wealthy people. Wealthy people from wealthy families, I've noticed that. I wasn't really seeing that growing up in the 80s to where wealthy kids would have sports cards. It seemed like, sports cards in the 80s when I would hang out with my friends, I'm hanging out with like kids that maybe their parents aren't very wealthy, Maybe they're low income, but they have sports cards. And why do they have sports cards? Because they could afford to buy them. It was their hobby. But what happens when you start to take that away from those people? You know what I mean? So you have low and middle income who are struggling to get by with the economy, whatever. And you start to take that away from those people, Beginning in the 90s, cards started to rise, the 2000s, 2010s, whatever. And now we're in the 2020s to where it's just like, I feel like you have to be a millionaire to get into the sports card hobby to do it the right way. And that is a harsh take on it, Why do you have to be a millionaire to do sports cards? Because they're being held hostage by a monopolistic corporation who's tied in with sports leagues who wants all your money. And you go, well, Pokemon's not really treating me that way. And so I understand, especially like if you're a parent with kids, I'd be like, no, you don't want these sports cards. No, you want those Pokemon. Why? Well, guess what? I can afford to buy you Pokemon. And if my parents, were dealing with the same issues when I was growing up in the 80s, they would have been pushing me in the Pokemon over football cards and baseball cards. When I came in the 1980s, I just loved football cards. And the great thing about football cards then was we could sit and watch all the games, and we could afford the sports, the football cards, and it wouldn't put a dent in my dad's or my mom's pocket. You know what I mean? They couldn't do that these days, I've seen parents go into, the local sports card shop, and they can maybe afford one pack. Give me a break, that's just pathetic. And that's one kid trying to get involved in the hobby, and his parents can only afford one pack of hobby football, for whatever it is, because Panini has its prices, astronomically so high, or Tops, and they're, unlicensed product, the same story. So anyway, there's a lot of red flags in these numbers. I believe there's a lot of reasons why sports cards are going down and TCG is going up. You want to point at the economy, you can point at it. I point at it, but then again, you get back in the TCG numbers and you can't just point at the economy. You have to go, you know what? TCG's doing something right and sports cards are doing something wrong. Anyway, hope you enjoy this episode. Hope you tune in again for the next one. Thank you to all my subscribers and my subscriber base. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe so I can continue to improve the channel. Anyway, hope you have a great day. I'm out of here. Bye.